Hi, everybody. My name is Juran. I'm from the climate group here at the Max Perutz Labs in Vienna, Austria. We are a grassroots initiative here at the Biological Institute, and we're trying to make our research and our university more sustainable. Next, from trying to influence structural changes at the institutes, we're also doing a lot of actions like waste management, recycling, energy reduction, and so on. Also looking at mobility, how to go on business trips and how to commute to work. Have a look on all our action on our website at the Max Perutz Sustainability. And today we're very happy to have Jana and Sandra as our speakers. They're both working at the University of Vienna in the Department of Environmental Psychology, and they will talk about why it's difficult to change or why or have action on climate change and implement it in our daily work. So I'll hand over to both Sandra and Jana, who you can already see. And they will talk for 20 minutes, both, so two parts of 20 minutes, and we'll have questions and discussion afterwards. So please join in and then put your questions in the chat or ask them after their talks. So Sandra and Jana, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for this nice introduction. We're very happy that we were invited and we're happy to be here today. And I will start us off on our talk. I said the title, why it is hard to act on climate change and what we can do about it. And just need to see that I can actually flip to the next slide. Sometimes it takes a bit of time. Here we go. Yeah, that's what you're supposed to see. All right. Yeah, before we start, a few words about us. No, here we go. This is too far. A few words about us. My name is Jana Köhler, and I am a PhD student since May in environmental psychology here at the University of Vienna. And I will be working in my PhD on the spreading of pro-climate norms. And with me here today is my dear colleague, Sandra Geiger. She's also a PhD student since May, and she will be working on ocean connectedness and the perception of marine threats. So you already heard that we're environmental psychologists, so I would like to explain to you in a few words what actually is environmental psychology. It seems to be taking a lot of time to go to the next slide. Otherwise, Sandra, could you try to flip to the next slide for me? Thanks. Yeah, so environmental psychology is concerned with relationships between humans and the environment. And that is not only the natural environment, but also the built environment. And yeah, climate change obviously has implications for both as well. If you just think about the fact that cities are heating up more and more. I think we can see it here in Vienna, and you might be able to see it wherever you are. Yeah, that cities are heating up more and more in our hot summers. So climate change has implications for both of these fields. But climate change is also not the only environmental threat that environmental psychologists might potentially be looking at. Just to name a few, like I just said, there's urban stress, but there's also forest degradation or biodiversity loss, some topics that maybe gain a bit less attention than climate change. And now, why is environmental psychology actually important? For that, I brought you this graph. It shows a scenario for a low carbon future that was sort of rated very likely by the UK Climate Change Committee. And you can see in the blue and the green areas, which together make up 62% of the measures required for the scenario, that both of these areas require at least some change from society or some behavioral change. And that is basically where we come in as environmental psychologists to investigate how can we bring these changes about, how can we make people change their behavior. Yeah, and now I can pass over to Sandra.
Yes, thank you. So the talk will be generally divided into two parts. I will first talk a little bit about how can we communicate about climate change and climate change impacts, and also about how can we change perceptions about climate change. And then in the second part of this talk, Jana will talk a little bit more about how we can change actual behavior. So about communication, most of the time as psychologists, we are asked, how can we best communicate about climate change or about climate change impacts? And usually my short answer is, well, it kind of depends. There's no one size fits all approach. And the long answer is that it depends mainly on whom we communicate with. And a quite famous study from the Yale Climate Change Communication Center, they have looked at what kind of climate change audiences there are around the globe, and they identified 6 different segments in the population. So first of all, they identified the alarmed ones. So those are the people who think that climate change is happening, it's human caused and an urgent threat. And those are also the ones who strongly support climate change policies or climate policies. The second one, or the second group, are the concerned ones. Those believe that climate change is generally happening, it's caused by humans and a serious threat, and they also support climate policies. However, their priority on climate policies is a bit lower because they still think that climate change impacts are quite distant in time and in space. The third group, they are the cautious ones, so they haven't really made up their minds yet whether climate change is happening or not, whether it's caused by humans, whether it's a natural process, whether it's really urgent to address. The fourth group, they are the disengaged. They surprisingly know quite little about climate change and have sometimes also rarely heard about it. The fifth group are the doubtful, so they don't really think that climate change is happening, or they think that it's simply a natural cycle, such that temperatures just naturally increase and will naturally go down again. And the very last group is basically the opposite group of the alarmed ones. Those are the dismissive. They are very convinced that climate change is not happening. It's not caused by humans, and they don't really perceive it as a threat. And they also strongly oppose most climate policies. So this kind of research, or this identification of different audiences, has been done in around 31 countries, and unfortunately not yet in Austria. So that's why I picked Germany as an example here. So now I would like you to go to the Mentimeter link I sent in the chat and answer the question, how many people do you think are alarmed and dismissive in Germany? Okay, I will just wait a little bit until almost everyone answered, so I can also see the replies here. Okay, I think that's almost everyone. So I hope you can see my Mentimeter screen now, and I will show you the results. Unfortunately, it's not working. Now, okay. So what we see here is that the average was around 39%. So you think 39% of people are alarmed in Germany, and around 31% are dismissive. Okay. Then we will go back to the presentation. So I hope you're already curious about the results of the study. So actually you were super good in estimating how many people are alarmed. So indeed, around 39% of people in Germany are alarmed. So that means that they kind of believe climate change is happening. They believe it's human caused. They believe it's a very urgent threat. And dismissive, in the dismissive group in Germany, there are only 3%. And that's actually a quite common phenomenon that people overestimate how many people are dismissive and don't really believe in climate change. And I also brought the results from the United States for you, where you can see that the rate of alarmed ones is quite comparable, so around 34%. And what's quite special about the United States is that among those 31 countries, they have the highest rate of dismissives with 11%. Okay, and here you can see the full results of the study, which has been conducted in February this year. So what I find really interesting is if you look at the top, that countries like Costa Rica, Colombia, and Mexico have a really high rate of alarmed people, so around 63%. That's quite impressive. However, if you look at the bottom of the graph, you can see Czech Republic, Russia, and the Netherlands, which have quite low rates of alarmed people, so around 15%. And what I've also already pointed out earlier is that when you look at the dismissive ones, so this is kind of the purple shaded area, that in most countries this rate is really low, around 2, 3, or 4%, except for the United States, where it's 11%. And what I also find interesting is that in most countries, the second largest segment, or even sometimes the largest segment, are the concerned ones. So why is this important, or what do we learn from that? So first of all, we see that there are actually quite large cross-country differences. Like look at the top of the graph where you see Costa Rica, and at the bottom of the graph where Russia and Czech Republic are. And on the other hand, there are also differences within the countries, because we have those 6 different segments. And for communication, this is important because communication needs to be adapted to the context. So first of all, to the country we're targeting, but on the other hand, also to the audience we are targeting. And contrary to very common beliefs, which we've also seen in the Mentimeter earlier, is that the dismissive group is actually not that large. So targeting the dismissive ones may actually not be such a successful strategy, because the group is most of the time quite large, and because they have very strong beliefs that climate change is not happening, that it's not urgent, and that it's not human caused. It's also extremely hard to change their opinion about that topic. And yeah, if you now got curious about what audience or what segment you belong to, we will probably also send the slides around later. And I just wanted to point you to this 6 Americas super short survey, where you can take a small quiz of 4 questions and actually find out to which of the audiences you belong to. Okay, so what's generally the challenge when communicating about climate change impacts, or in generally when trying to change perceptions about climate change? So as I've already said, the concerned ones, so the ones that think climate change is happening, who support those policies, but still believe that the impacts are quite far away in the future, so in temporal as well in space. Those are, in most countries, the 2nd largest audience, sometimes also the largest audience. And the challenge with this audience is that, as I said, the impact, or they perceive the impact of climate change as distant in time and space. And psychologists also have a term for that, namely psychological distance. And psychological distance is has 4 different components, which I will now explain a little bit more in detail. So the first component of psychological distance is the spatial distance. So most people actually think that climate change impacts won't take place or will take place in a different location, different physical location, not necessarily where they are. So most of us probably, when thinking about climate change impacts, we think about the melting of ice at the North Pole, or maybe some wildfires in the US. And this is actually quite a common phenomenon. The second component of psychological distance is the social component. It's quite closely linked to the first one. So we believe that the climate change impacts will mainly affect others, not so much us. The third component is the temporal component, which means that people often think that the impacts will take place quite far away in the future. So they will affect me only in the future, or won't even affect me, but future generations. And the last component is the hypothetical distance, which basically means that climate change impacts also involve a lot of uncertainty. So we don't really know what will happen. We don't really know when it will happen. So people most of the time also underestimate the probability of those impacts happening. And psychological distance, it's a really important construct because it's a major barrier to engage people in mitigation actions. Because on the one hand, if you feel psychologically distant to climate change and climate change impacts, you feel that they are less personally relevant, and you also feel less motivated to act upon climate change. And on the bright side, some psychological interventions have actually shown that we can reduce this psychological distance, which then in turn can increase policy support and pro-environmental intentions and behaviors. But this is also still a relatively new research area. So there's some positive results already, which I will show you one example later, but definitely also more research is needed on when and how psychological distance reduction indeed works. Okay, so as I've already said, I brought you a small experiment about psychological distance. And the idea is just to give you a little bit of an insight how psychology conducts research, and what we can actually conclude from such experiments. So first of all, I would like everyone whose first name starts with A to K to close their eyes. So you don't have to do it now. I will tell you when, and everyone else can keep their eyes open, or you can also just quickly go for 3-4 minutes to another room, grab some water, and then come back. Then I will show you some pictures, and you will fill in a very quick survey with 2 questions, and then we will switch around. So everyone's first name who starts with A to K will then open their eyes, and the rest will close their eyes. Okay, so I hope it's clear. Then I would like to start with the people whose first name starts with A to K to close their eyes or quickly grab some water, and everyone else keep their eyes open. Okay, so now you've seen the pictures. The people who have their eyes closed, please still keep your eyes closed. And for the people who have their eyes open, I will now paste a code into the chat, and you just go once again to that survey and just fill in the 2 questions. Okay, I think we have most people, so I will go to the second slide now, and you can fill in the second question. Okay, I think most people are done voting. So I now ask you to everyone's first name who starts with A to K to open your eyes, and the rest, please close your eyes. Okay, then I guess we can get started. Okay, so same procedure for you. I will also send you a link now. You can go to this link and fill in the 2 questions. Okay, I also think we have most of the people here, so I will go to the next slide, and that didn't work. You should see the other question. Now, yes, and now you should see the second question. Okay, I think most of you have voted now, and now everyone can open their eyes again or come back. Thanks a lot for participating, and I'm sure you're very curious what the other group saw and what the original experiment found. Before I show you your own results. So first of all, the first group has seen those black and white pictures. Those were mainly or were non-photographs without any people on it. The main focus was on the causes of climate change, and also it kind of depicted the process as gradual. So for example, here the group saw a gradual increase in CO2 levels or a gradual increase in temperature. And this experimental condition was supposed to increase psychological distance to climate change impacts. And the second group, they have seen the pictures on the right. So those were pictures from Vienna or Austria. And those were photographs, sometimes with people on it. And the difference to the abstract images was that they kind of displayed certain consequences. And most of the time, also below the pictures, a concrete place, for example, Vienna, and a concrete time when this event happened was mentioned. Okay, and now I will I need to switch once again to show you your results. Okay, so we are first going to, yes, here, have a look at the abstract condition. So with the black and white photos, so here we see the temporal distance in terms of years. So that was, the average was 2.3. And the first result was about spatial distance. So where it will happen in terms of geographical or physical location was around 2.9. Okay, so this was the group who was supposed to have the higher psychological distance. And now we're going to look into the concrete condition. I hope, yeah, you can already see it. So what we can see here, if I remember correctly, in the concrete condition now the mean was around 1.6 compared to 2.3 earlier. So indeed, this condition reduced the spatial distance. And I think here something may have happened with the coding. I'm not sure why this is the average is 7.2. So we will skip this result. I'm very sorry. Yeah, but at least what we've seen is that the spatial distance was a little bit smaller in the concrete condition. And for this one, what should have happened is that the temporal distance should have also been smaller compared to the abstract condition. Okay, so what I've already said is, or what we've just seen, at least now in terms of spatial distance, is that in the more abstract condition, climate change was viewed as spatially and temporally more distant than in the concrete condition. And in the original experiments, they also tested the two other dimensions of psychological distance to climate change, and they found no difference in terms of social and hypothetical distance, just for completeness of the results. And what we can kind of learn from that is that yeah, concrete images could be a potential way to reduce the spatial and temporal distance to climate change and climate change impact. So kind of making people feel closer in terms of geography as well as time to climate change and climate change impacts. And yeah, I think I found this experiment quite nice because it's a really simple way, and it seems to be effective. But of course, we also need to take into account that such information or such a one-time intervention is seldom alone to change people's perceptions in the long run, and most of the time it's also not enough to change behavior, which is the perfect transition to our second part, psychological behavior change strategies.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Exactly. So this was a very nice segue into the psychological behavior change strategies that I want to talk you through. And because they can at times seem quite abstract, I also brought you examples from sort of the real life or from companies or institutions, which you might find useful. Yeah, so let's start. I think I still have problems clicking to the next slide. Thank you very much. Did you do it now, Sandra, or did it work? Yeah, I have a lot of delay. I'm very sorry. So I need to flip one page back. I spoiled my own examples. Okay. So I want to start you off on the probably most common and probably also most well-known behavior change strategy, information and appeals. And I brought you two examples from research first. So purely informational strategy would be, for example, to provide statistics on some kind of environmental problem, or to add labels to a product that communicates some kind of product characteristics, or to give tips on some kind of behavior. And this example in the left-hand side is a poster that basically gives you tips on which item to put where. I think you just left presentation mode, Sandra. Yeah, so that would be purely informational. And then on the right-hand side, if you pick one of the three, and if you look at the middle column, you can see that that's more of an appeal to values, because not only does the poster tell us to please compost our leftovers, but it also says that North America has 8% of the world's population and still consumes 33% of the world's resources, which should alert us to the value of equality, or appeal to the value of equality. Yeah, and some real life examples of this would be that, for example, I thought it started working now, but you might need to flip for me. I'm just going to say next slide, if that's okay. That, for example, Deloitte is sending all their employees to climate change school to create awareness through knowledge. And then on the right-hand side, you can see an example that would be more an appeal, where the brand Share not only communicates that their products are climate neutral, but they're also social, because of their concept that if you buy one bottle of soap, then a person in need also gets a bottle of soap. So they're appealing to pro-social values. Next slide, please. Or next animation. So it has been found that these strategies are not effective on their own. So they should ideally be combined. So next slide. They could be, for example, combined with engagement strategies, which are more psychological, and they consist, for example, of commitment or goal setting or block leader approach, which I will explain in a bit more detail now. Thank you. So commitment, for example, comprises of people agreeing to behave in a certain way, and then the fact that they have agreed to that holds them like psychologically accountable, which makes it more likely that they actually do what they committed to. For example, it could be that a person commits that next week I will take the bus to work on at least 2 days to save the environment or be better to the climate. And commitment works actually best when it is made publicly instead of privately. I think a lot of us know that from our private life, and on a personal rather than a group level, and also in writing instead of verbally. Next slide, please. And goal setting is very connected to this and also very similar. And setting goals for ourselves to change our behavior actually works best when the goals are ambitious, realistic, but also achievable in a short time frame. And it's also advisable to actually let people decide if they want to pick their own goal or if they want to get a predetermined goal from someone else. So that's just a personality difference. Okay, and now 2 examples that combine commitment and goal setting in a very nice way. On the left-hand side, you can see Cycle September, which is a global biking challenge where if you collect a certain amount of cycling kilometers, and you can also set your goal for this, your own personal goal, then you can win something. And there are also challenges that are very similar to this, like Veganuary, which you have probably heard of, where people commit to eating vegan throughout the whole of January without getting any prize. And an example from Austria would be Österreich Radelt, where you might want to sign up with your team if you're based here. It's very similar. You can collect some cycling kilometers, and then you can also win prizes or simply just compare or see your achievement. Yeah, and another example, which I find personally particularly cute and engaging, is this little guy here called KlimaKal, and he was actually developed by 2 environmental psychologists. So he is based on scientific findings, and it's a service that the company sells to other companies who want to decrease their CO2 emissions. And KlimaKal is basically a chatbot that you can access through an app, and he provides daily activities and quizzes, but also combines goal setting and feedback on the CO2 savings that people in the office could actually achieve. Yeah, and the last engagement approach would be block leader approach, which consists of basically people becoming advocates, people who are already doing a certain behavior that is beneficial. And it has been found that if you try to convince people to do a certain behavior, then it's more effective if it's done by a block leader than, for example, simply just a flyer or brochure. And it also has been found that within your social network, being connected to more opinion or advice leaders about being climate or living climate friendly is actually associated with also greater pro-environmental behavior in yourself. And really important for this is that the block leader is credible and also consistent in their own behavior, because otherwise some reverse effects could be found. Yeah, and a nice example of the block leader approach, or a very prominent example, would be that the Nestlé CEO a year ago urged all employees to actually take part in Veganuary, with a strong emphasis on the fact that he was taking part himself and regular updates. And yeah, he actually phrased it the way that he's passing the baton to the employees. And in that way, he also emphasized that everyone can do it and it's also everybody's responsibility. All right. Last but not least, social norms and social comparison are also an important tool for behavioral change. And there are actually different norms that you can use for this, and they also work a bit differently. So starting with descriptive norms, they actually communicate what most other people do in a way that includes no kind of judgment. So this is really an objective information. For example, most people in Austria own their own personal car. And on the left-hand side in the graph, you can see, if you look at also the left 2 bars, that people received some information on how much energy their neighbors were using, and then subsequently they changed their own behavior. And when they received the descriptive information, so only how much others are using, those who were using a lot they reduced their usage, but those who were already super good and using little energy, which are the light gray colored people, they actually adjusted their consumption upwards towards the norm they were given. So this is known as the boomerang effect, which is why it is advisable to actually combine descriptive norms with injunctive norms. And injunctive norms don't communicate simply just what most other people do, but what most other people think is the right thing to do. So this includes some moral judgment component. And in this study, they actually also did that. So for those people who were already having a very low energy consumption, they added a smiley to communicate that this is what is approved of. And for the others, they added a frowny to say that they're not doing very well. Yeah, and this could actually eliminate the boomerang effect. But now you would need to click one further, please, Sandra, for me. Sometimes there are behaviors that relate to climate change that are not yet majority behaviors. So if you just think about the car example, a lot of people still own their own personal car. So this would not be good to communicate because it just shows people that they should probably also do that because everyone does. So what researchers have started to look into is trend norms. And those norms basically communicate how many people are starting to change their behavior. So another prominent example would be that more and more people are reducing their meat consumption. And even if the absolute number of people is not so high yet, this has been shown to also affect behavior. And my example of social norms and comparisons, again, Klimakal. I'm not being paid by them. So here you can see that people in the company, the different teams could actually, form teams and then collect points for activities, and they could get this immediate feedback and compare the performance of one team to the other. So in reality, this often looks like some kind of competition. And this is also a really good example that the feedback is very immediate for people, and it's very clear the link between behavior and feedback. So when people sort of logged in the logbook of the app a certain behavior that they did, then they got immediate points. All right, so these strategies have been found successful, especially in combination, but still sometimes effects can be small. And there have been some sort of answers to why this could be, and it relates strongly to what Sandra presented, that behavior change is often seen as a one point in time decision, whereas most of the time it's actually a process that happens, over some weeks or months. And people can be in different stages of change where they actually need different kind of information or different kinds of interventions. They also need to solve different problems in each stage. So in this first stage, in the pre-decisional stage of this model of behavior change, people are still thinking about what actually is the problem. So they might be thinking about, if they're very skeptical, they might even be thinking, is climate change real? Or if they think it's real, they might be thinking, how does my personal behavior actually relates to this? And for example, they might be thinking about that they use a lot of lab resources and a lot of lab equipment, and that this might be bad for the environment. And then they might also think whether they're personally responsible for changing this. And this kind of thinking will also be influenced by the social norms that they're surrounded by, and also by, for example, how bad they really feel about climate change. So if they reach the conclusion that they're responsible, they will move on to the pre-action stage, where they actually think about what can be done about this. And they will contemplate about different behavioral alternatives. For example, they might be thinking, could we maybe share lab equipment between labs so that we don't need 10, but only 3 microscopes, a bit like the car sharing idea. And then it also becomes important how easy that would be to do and how much it would cost in time and money. And if they find a good alternative, they will move on to the action stage, where they will think about how can this equipment sharing actually be done. And here planning skills are very important. So they might be thinking whether they need a time schedule so that it's not always occupied, or they might think which department is actually going to pay for it. And if someone from a different department breaks it, who's going to pay for that? And if they were successful in planning all these things, then they will actually move on to the behavior. So it is only then that the actual behavior will take place. So there goes a lot of work into this. And in this last post-actional stage, the biggest task for people is actually how can they upkeep the behavior. So for example, if you notice that all the time, all the equipment is being used because the group has been growing, do you go straight back to everybody has their own equipment, or are you actually successful in coming up with a solution and maintaining the behavior successfully? Yeah, this model has also found support. And most recently, researchers have focused more on how to get people to start thinking in the pre-decisional stage. And this might also be relevant for you, that it has been suggested that we need to grab people's attention. We need to use windows of opportunity or windows of change. And we also need to break their habits so that they don't keep going the path of least resistance. Yeah, so to sum it up for you, before we move on to our discussion, successful behavior change strategies are actually disruptive or attention grabbing in some way, or they use windows of opportunity, for example, home office through COVID. They are also combined so that you can leverage the effect from multiple strategies, and they should be tailored to the audience so that people get help with what they actually need help with. Yeah, and thank you very much for listening. And if you're curious to learn more about the work we're doing in this field, you can visit our website. You can also read our blog. Our group is also growing, so there are many exciting things coming up.